I'm going to tell you a story that I really love. A story from Trees for the Forest, a collection of myths by Patricia Cast. He was a man of no importance. He was born, lived, and died with no more permanent trace than a water bird's passage down a canal. For a while, in the lifetime of his sons and his grandchildren, he was remembered, but eventually time closed over the memory. His name was used among his descendants as it had been among his ancestors, as a continuity without individual meaning, and in the end, time closed over that, too. The name, its meaning, and its roots were gone. While he lived, not long, for he died in his 30s, he inhabited a small village in what, for our time, we call the Andes. He was a potter. His hands shaped the vessels in which his neighbors cooked, stored their corn, and lit their dwellings. His hands knew better than the words the texture and variety of clay, the depth of a glaze, the needed heat of a firing, and its time span. His body knew what shapes and textures lent themselves to what purposes. In his work, not particularly original, for he had learned this from his father and grandfather, his hands were aware of the uses and the meaning of these uses of the things he made. As his fingers shaped a pot to store seed, they touched the hope of sowing time, frugality, greed, and also famine. A child of his died of hunger in one long winter. In cooking pots, he touched the warmth of family fires and the companionship of those bound together for security, if not always for love. They touched the funeral feast, ceremonial meals accompanying death, in which an attempt was made to ensure a connection of the living with the dead, and a continuing of the one in the other. And there were the hands wet with tears on such occasions, at least once his own, when his first young wife had died, giving birth to their second child. Tears had moistened the clay for a while. After that, as his hands shaped new vessels, among them wine cups for a wedding. He had married soon again. His children needed another mother, and he needed more sons to help him continue his name. And besides, he was an affectionate man, not meant to live alone, with love enough for more than one human being in his heart. His new wife was not like his first one, neither was his first like her. The village was not often troubled by royal officials. It was out of the way and offered little. It was, nevertheless, subject to the labor tax that had not been demanded in the lifetime of any but the elders. Since to most of the village this had never happened, it had become something that would not happen. It was therefore both a shock and grief when one day it did. The summons came, and 10 of the younger men went away, farther than they had ever dreamed of going before. Among them went the potter, not as young as the others, but more knowledgeable about the clay to make bricks for the newest stage of the temple complex. For him, more than for his companions, the work was frustrating. For them it was an unwanted interruption in their lives, performing an unwanted task until their allotted section of the wall was finished and they could return home. For him, accustomed to fashion the stuff he handled to the immediate purposes of living, the vast unseen design was meaningless, and to find himself endlessly emptying a wooden mold with the same square corners and the same straight lines was a limitation that slowly eroded him. His fingers had become the manner in which he lived, and his life expressed itself in what he made. Life shrank to the dimensions of a brick. Perhaps it is not surprising that he died. Certainly no one was surprised at the death of a workman. He was buried near the site with the others, and his sons never managed to make the long journey to bring him home. The required section of wall was finished, and for a time it made part of the new complex. Eventually, in its turn, it was encased in a larger, higher level of building and was preserved at the core of the later structure. The Temple Mountain spread, grew tall, and then, like a tree, it slowly died. Gradually, it withered, crumbled, and blew away to dust. Another time came in which none of this history was important, but in which people allowed their curiosity to dwell on strangely shaped, eroded hills. Some imaginations fashioned spacious, fallen halls with treasures in the dark beneath, and they ripped the Temple Hill apart in search of forgotten wealth. Others came with a different passion to lay bare the meaning of the hill and stripped it in layers with the involved detachment of a surgeon penetrating a human body. What had not blown away on many winds was exposed. Core upon core, brick upon brick, and many more curious people came to stare and wonder, imagine, or just to pass the time in a different way. Among them, one day came a woman, seeking to pass time in a different way because the ordinary way of its passing was too painful to endure much longer. The bleak hill had little to attract, and she walked away. The desolate plain was not much better, very little grew, a few thorny weeds struggling for life along the shallow folds of ground whose regularity, so the guide had said, indicated that they once had been canals. But she felt the warmth on her neck and the back of her hands, and the wind blew, somewhat gritty with dust. She stopped walking for a moment to concentrate on feeling it, soothing herself in the quiet of pure sensation. She felt dust on her neck, and with a quick movement of annoyance or nervousness, wiped it away with her hand. Then, for no good reason, she stooped, burying her hand in the soil and letting its grains run through her fingers as she scooped it up. It was a caressing gesture, but she was unconscious of it, staring without seeing at the worn hill and the clear, unshaped sky beyond. She did not for the moment know where she was. She simply remained stooping, running the dry soil through her fingers, the expression on her face changing as the muscles around her eyes slowly relaxed. Her mind and thoughts drifted quietly, and the wind blew on her neck. A few moments passed. Eventually, she came slowly to her feet and dusted off her hands. She walked about a little longer and wandered back to her party. On the return journey, she felt the need to close her eyes and be silent. Gradually, she became aware that something had changed. She did not know when it happened or how, but she was no longer alone.